Welcome everyone to this Sutta study program. I especially am welcoming the folks at the Aranya Bodhi Hermitage. I see Venerable Kachayana and Venerable Dhammanusari. Are there any others in the room there with you? Venerable Metajivi? And Sada and Daniel. We give a special call out to Daniel, who has the wish to be the steward of the forest for the next coming weeks and months. So it's a wonderful addition to our community here. We have Venerable Dhammavara with me here, and Elaine, Gabriella, Richard, Ruwanti. Today, I am wishing to consider how the awakening factors of piety are sometimes translated as rapture, bliss, or joyful interest, and passaddhi, which is sometimes translated as tranquility. So I wanted to consider how these are shown up in the suttas. I noticed 4 different patterns, especially where piti and passaddhi appear. One is in relationship to the 7 factors of awakening, the bojjhangas. Another one is in relationship to the Upanisa sequence, which is a series of helpful states made famous by Bhikkhu Bodhi in his translation and commentary about transcendental dependent origination. And a third context is in the context of sama samadhi, or right concentration. And then fourth context is in particular for passaddhi, or tranquility, in the context of enlightenment, the quality of the arahant of being free from any kind of attachment, therefore free from any agitation, and therefore experiencing the fullness of tranquility. So let's go ahead and take a look at one of the sutras that I've selected for you. Okay. This one is called Making a Wish. Chaitana Karaniya Sutta. So the translator has translated Chaitana as a wish, Karaniya is making, and then a sutta. It's in the numerical discourses, or the Anguttara Nikaya, number 11.2. And I'll just go right into it. Mendicants. An ethical person who has fulfilled ethical conduct need not make a wish. So ethics is called sila. That's referring to precepts, or you could call it virtue. And this making a wish is chaitanaya. Now, and the wish would be, may I have no regrets. Avipatisaro. or may regrets not arise for me. I want to take just a second and reflect about how the word chaitana appears in this sutta. It seems to me that even though in the Abhidhamma, chaitana has a very universal kind of meaning. It's a mental factor that accompanies other states of mind. It's almost similar to what modern philosophy calls intentionality. So in philosophy, that doesn't mean what we want to do. It rather means how in a conscious moment, the mind is leaning on its object. And so it's connecting to an object, and you can't have the moment of consciousness without that intention towards some object. But in this case, I think it's a much simpler idea, but important not to miss. And that is that chaitana as a volition is described as referring to a karmic volition. A wholesome chaitana will lead to a pleasant future, or a good rebirth in a pleasant realm. An unwholesome chaitana would lead to a painful future, or to rebirth in a woeful state. And then it's possible to practice in such a way to reduce and finally escape from creating those kind of karmic chaitanas which are leading to rebirth, that when we awaken, we're no longer seeking any kind of a rebirth. We're no longer leading into a future. And so here, it's almost like this is starting the pattern. It's starting at a very simple, basic level. You don't have to be enlightened to experience. If I have one who has fulfilled ethical conduct, need not make a wish, may I have no regrets. It's only natural that an ethical person has no regrets. Say anybody, even a child, could understand this. But in this case, if one is doing an action because of wishing for some next thing to come along, that's creating the pattern of building up merits or building up demerits for future birth. But it's not necessary to build up merits or demerits. Just do the right thing, in this case, fulfill ethical conduct. And then the next part of the sequence will arise by itself through the course of nature. Dhammata is what he's translated as natural. So in this case, the Dhamma means the Dhamma is the truth of the nature of reality, which has been pointed out by the Blessed One and passed down to us in the teachings that have been learned and memorized, and which we try to understand and explain without distorting or misrepresenting them. That's the Dhamma as like the body of the tradition of the teachings. But then in this case, the Dhammata is whether or not a Tathagata exists in the world. The realities of nature still exist. And I believe that's what's being pointed out here. So it's only natural that an ethical person has no regrets. When you have no regrets, when you need not make a wish, may I feel joy. It's only natural that joy springs up when you have no regrets. Now, this particular sutta is one of the versions of the Upanishad Sutta. I wonder if anyone can remember any of the other versions, because the first one or two steps is different in the different versions. Can anybody remember the Upanishad Sutta and the Samyutta Nikaya? Do you remember how it begins? Raise your hand if you can remember.
Is it starting with dukkha?
Yes.
And then faith?
Yes. It starts with a downward slide of dependent origination, but instead of culminating in old age, sickness, and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair, instead, in that particular sutta, it culminates in dukkha. And then the sutta says from dukkha is the proximate cause for faith, or saddha, and faith is the proximate cause for joy, right? Yeah. And then there's another version that appears in the Vinaya. Can anybody remember how that one starts out? Well, instead of starting with sila, it starts with precepts. And so then based on precepts comes non-regret. Based on non-regret comes joy. This joy here, the Pali word is called pamoja. It's related to the word mudita, which is one of the four Brahmaviharas. Mudita is sometimes translated as sympathetic joy. This is explained in the commentary as being less strong or less purified than the state, the piti and the sukha that can arise later on in this sequence. But it's the joy that springs up in this case from being freed from remorse. When you feel joy, you need not make a wish. May I experience rapture. And in this case, what translated as rapture means pieti. This is a special state which is emphasized in the description of the jhana. In the commentary, it is mentioned that a weak form of pieti can exist as a preliminary to jhana. This is a strong experience of happiness that's not connected with an object. So it's not because craving something and then feeling that you're about to get the thing that you crave. It's not because of disliking something and feeling good because you're about to get away from the thing you dislike. It's not because of possessing something and feeling pleasure because of relishing and delighting in holding on to that possession. In some teachers make a distinction between pleasure and happiness. The pleasure being, so it's, you could say like piti or bliss or has an evil twin, and the evil twin is greed. So, or you could say the evil twin is sensuality, sensual craving. And I actually would like to pause here for a minute and ask the students if you can explain in your own words from your own experience how you can tell the difference between the pure, you could say, spiritual happiness, or the happiness which is not tainted by greed, as opposed to simple greed or a simple sensual pleasure. How can you tell the difference? Okay, we've got an answer from your Hermitage.
Perhaps the differences in greed, it has to do with possessing something outside of self and the attachment of that possessing, and happiness almost is the opposite. It's the release from the possessing and the externalizing.
Okay, that's good. That's one difference.
To me, it just feels different in my mind. Like the happiness is stable and calm, whereas the wanting or the greed is like a motion. It's unsteady, and when I really tune into it, my mind feels different. It's like a different texture inside of my like the room in my mind, kind of. It's almost like oily.
Okay, very good. So the different felt sense, as well as that quality of instability, that with pleasure, you're like a monkey, always going from tree to tree, letting go of one pleasure and reaching for the next one. I'm going to call on either Gabriella or Alessandra.
It's Gabriella, and I hope it's okay that I talk without going
Yes.
in picture. I was thinking actually that all the so-called more sensual pleasures, they're connected to some kind of tension in the body. There is as a little bit maybe along the lines that Daniel already have spoken, that it's because it's connected to greed, so there is a tension, there is a grasping in some way to that pleasure. Yeah. It can be gross or it can be more subtle, but when it's more a pleasantness of the mind, so to speak, then actually the body is totally relaxed.
Yeah.
So
very
yeah,
good.
that's my experience.
Thank you. I'll just comment on that what Gabriella has pointed out points to the distinction between the Ramisa Sukha Vedana and Niramisa Sukha Vedana. Ramisa literally means meat, and so that's a pleasant feeling that's based in the body. And then Niramisa is sometimes called like a spiritual happiness or a mental happiness. But other teachers say actually that Ramisa is affected by impurities or imperfections, and Niramisa is pure from those impurities. And so, but we experience it as being different in that way. Now, Richard.
Thank you, Ayya. To me, this goes back to the Buddha as he's about to die, or thinks he's most likely going to die soon after his austerities. And he remembers going into the first jhana, and he says, "Why should I be afraid of that pleasure? It's not a sensual pleasure." So it's a distinction between pleasure of the senses and just a pure kind of mental pleasure, without the senses, you might say, which is similar to what you were just saying about those two different words and their distinction.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Great. Do I have another comment from Gabriella?
No, it comes from Alessandra.
Okay.
And actually, I fully agree with Daniel and Gabriella. And then there is also a quality that is connected with pleasure. Pleasure is a little bit like having an expectation that is fulfilled, or we try to fulfill. In that moment, there is pleasure, then disappears, and it becomes immediately suffering. While what is my experience of this non-sensual pleasure, the mind that is opening, it's actually not maybe always an incredible, strong feeling. Can become, but it can be also very subtle, but it's totally non-plannable. It arises of itself when the causes are right. And I personally have not the ability to set the causes right, trying, but it is like a maturing of the bud so that it can open up like a flower.
Very good. So we can go back to Elaine. You have a comment?
No, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Sometimes when I hear comments from other students, they resonate with me. I might have wanted to ask that question and not kind of done it. But so thank you to the students too for their comments.
Okay. Rawanti.
Sensual pleasure is always connected with the object. I think it's about either getting what you desire or pushing away what you don't desire. Whereas the sensual pleasure is not connected to the sense object. It's comes when you understand them. Just a little comment.
Very good. Thank you. I'm going to return to the sutta now. When you feel joy, you need not make the wish, may I experience rapture, piti. It's only natural that rapture arises when you're joyful. I'll just comment a little further. When they talked about the sila, including purifying one's mental ethics to not dwell in unwholesome thoughts, but to give up and prevent the unwholesome thoughts as well as the unwholesome speech and actions. At that point, it's very similar to having abandoned or let go of the 5 hindrances, which are considered to be what blocks wisdom and prevents the entry into samadhi. And so the joy and relief of being away from the hindrances then is where this piti or this rapture is arising. It's like the rapture, the piti is arising from out of an absence. It's rather not coming from a possession or from reaching for something, but instead from the freedom of the space, which is without the negativities. If the mind is full of rapture, you need not make a wish, may my body become tranquil. It's only natural that your body becomes tranquil when your mind is full of rapture. And now this is something I was actually emphasizing that this morning in the guided meditation, is elsewhere, possibly somewhere in the sutta and definitely in the commentary, they talk about this passaddhi as being both physical or mental, that there's mental tranquility and physical tranquility. But in the sutta, we very often see it pointed out in context of the body. And some teachers make that body into something sort of intellectual. They think of the body as being a group, like a body of soldiers or something like that. And so they make the body into the 5 khandhas, and anyways, they create something much more theoretical out of this idea, may my body become tranquil. But other teachers, and I'm kind of persuaded of this, are saying that when they're talking about the body, they're speaking about the physical body in this sutta, in this sequence. And the wonderful thing about the tranquility of the body is that the body doesn't lie. So if the mind has obtained that freedom and that piety that's manifested in this tranquility of the body, I could even read you a description. I don't want you to take this description as a gospel because it's from a Mahayana source. But nevertheless, I have an endorsement from Bhante Sujata saying, yes, that this author just has it a pretty good description. Let's see if I can find it here. The way it's described is that the entire body becomes soft, completely soft, as if you have no bones, and yet the body is naturally in a perfectly upright posture like a tree, and that the chi energetic aspect of the body is unobstructed and flows very easily. There we go. So when the mind is full of rapture, you do not wish, may my body become tranquil. What do we do if the body doesn't become tranquil? My idea is that it could be at some level which we're not really aware of, that there could be some psychological tension which is holding us back, some grief, some sorrow, some desire, some grudge, some fear, any one of all different kinds of, I'll say, psychological issues that could be manifested in terms of bodily tensions. Even this could be memories of things that we experienced earlier in our own lifetime. If perhaps someone faced a really terrible circumstance when they were young, before they had any wisdom, and then at that time they didn't have either the maturity or the spiritual training to be able to cope with whatever trauma that they were experiencing, and then that trauma would have been buried and become, in a way, sort of like locked up within the body. And so then during meditation, it can happen for a long time that these past traumas or these karmic knots or these negative habits can express themselves in terms of the body and be, in a way, preventing this step from really happening, the body becoming tranquil, and that this piti and this passaddhi arising. And my idea for that is, if that's the circumstance, then we must practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness. We must look with interest at what's arising, aiming for full understanding, to see whether any knowledge comes about, to see if we could recognize that there's some bit of dukkha, which is expressing itself through the body. And then if it's dukkha, do we have enough courage in doing a Dhammanupassana? Do we have enough courage to be able to ask, like, what am I holding on to? And to see clearly that it's like I'm clinging to something. You know, it could even be like something that terrified me when I was a little kid, and I'm still clinging, you know, because I haven't fully brought up to awareness and dealt with that particular old trauma. But then if one can relax around it, let it go, and say, oh, that's frightening, or oh, that's unpleasant, oh, that's painful, and then accept and acknowledge and just see with the full awareness through the satipatthana process, then those things can be cleared and create the space where then subsequently this tranquility in the body is able to arise. But if it does arise for you, and this body tranquility arises for you, then according to this sutta, when you feel bliss, you need not make a wish. May my mind be immersed in samadhi. It's only natural for the mind to become immersed in samadhi when you feel bliss. So then, according to the sequence, if one has been trying to practice sama samadhi, when we have that experience, that deep relaxation in the body, then we might recognize, okay, now it's possible to enter samadhi, and to be glad for that, and then to go ahead and practice that sama samadhi. I'm going to, a little bit later on, take you to a different sutta that circles back to how this happens more in the context of the formal description of sama samadhi. In this sutta, it emphasizes the transition from samadhi to wisdom, from wisdom to liberation. When your mind is immersed in samadhi, you need not make a wish. May I truly know and see. This is yata bhuta janami passamiti. So what comes to be is this yata bhuta passami. In my opinion, although I don't see this often affirmed by the other teachers, but Bhuta is referring to becoming, independent origination. And then Yata is how, so becoming how. And this always makes me think of dependent origination, like how did this come to be? Or towards what existence is this going? So that's seeing things as they are, is seeing things in the context of the flow of causes and conditions, the flow of cause and result that's related to the stream of becoming. Elsewhere, it's most often translated as seeing things as they really are. It's only natural to truly know and see how your mind is immersed, when your mind is immersed in samadhi. And then when you truly know and see, you need not make a wish. May I grow disillusioned. This is nibbindamiti. Nibbida is also translated as disenchantment. It's when you lose interest, you thoroughly lose interest in all of those objects which used to attract your sensual desire or your sensual aversion. So then you could say you've been there, you've done that, you've had enough. You don't need to repeat it again. That's a nibbida. It's only natural to grow disillusioned when you truly know and see. When you're disillusioned, you need not make the wish. May I become dispassionate. The verb virajami, and that's related to the noun you see in some of the other versions, are viraga. And then viraga is translated as lust or passion. I very much connect viraga with emotional reactivity. And so then the emotional reactivity fades away when we see things accurately as they are, and when we no longer are taken in by the things that used to attract our desire. I'm going to invite Damon with a question.
Thank you, Ayya. I came a little late, but I got the gist. I wanted to ask if the emphasis, notwithstanding that most of the sutta doesn't go into the specifics of skillful ethics and ethical conduct, nonetheless, it just seems to infer, is it true that what's inferred here is that none of this is possible without starting from skillful ethics, which the basics are of the following the precepts, and I'm just wondering if the rest of it is really putting the cart before the horse.
Skillful ethics are foundational. As we go along the spiraling upward spiral of our awakening, it could be that we would view our ethics as a more in a different way than we did before. So for somebody who's a drug addicted murderer and a thief, if they would give up their drug addiction, stop murdering and stop thieving, that would be like a really important accomplishment for their spiritual progress. And then subsequently, when we get this idea that all morality is arising from this intention for not harming And then if, like in talking to somebody, if you somehow their feelings get hurt, right? And then you're saying, well, was I intentionally being cruel to that person? Did I hurt their feelings? Or was it really that, my intentions were good and it's just something that was that other person's business? So then we have to do a lot of deep introspection to see whether we are being, hostile or unfriendly or hurtful, or in these more subtle ways. And then later on, it could be that just thinking certain kind of thoughts, I might realize I'm poisoning myself by thinking these thoughts, and so then it would become part of my morality not to poison myself. So it's not just a cut and dry that you solve it. You do step A first, and then you do step B, and then you do step C. You're sort of doing them all again and again at different levels. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. We'll go back to this sutta then. So then they have become dispassionate, or free from afflictive emotional reactivity, or free from craving towards sensual objects. And then when you're dispassionate, you need not make a wish. May I realize the knowledge and vision of freedom. The freedom is vimutti, and jnana is the wisdom, and dasana is the seeing. And then satchi is with your own eyes. Karomi is you've done it. So you've done it yourself with your own eyes. You've had this realization of the knowledge and vision of freedom. It's only natural to realize the knowledge and vision of freedom when you're dispassionate. And so, mendicants, the knowledge and vision of freedom is the purpose and benefit of dispassion. Dispassion is the purpose and benefit of disillusionment. Disillusionment is the purpose and benefit of truly knowing and seeing. Truly knowing and seeing is the purpose and benefit of immersion. Immersion is the purpose and benefit of bliss. Bliss is the purpose and benefit of tranquility. Tranquility is the purpose and benefit of rapture. Rapture is the purpose and benefit of joy. Joy is the purpose and benefit of not having regrets. Not having regrets is the purpose and benefit of skillful ethics. So the bottom line for skillful ethics is holding the precepts or the code of behavior, which is supporting all of this. If it's not supporting all this, then you haven't quite gotten a hold of the right way of holding on to skillful ethics. And so the good qualities flow on and fill up from one to another, if we're going from the near shore to the far shore. Did you just see a different screen than before? We've been looking at the 7 factors of awakening that starts here with mindfulness, goes to the investigation of dhammas, Dhamma vichaya, giving rise to energy or virya, coming to joy or rapture, the piti, and coming to relaxation or tranquility, passaddhi. And these are the factors that we're discussing now. And then these, according to the 7 Bojjhanga sequence, then matures to concentration or samadhi, or the calm one-pointed meditation. The meditation that has full awareness perfect mindfulness, and that one-pointedness, or you could say the unification of the mind, and then that matures to equanimity, which is being able to accept reality without craving or aversion, or it could be when one is within samadhi and evenly onlooking attention, which is examining the phenomenon that can be experienced within the meditation. And by way of comparison, the Upanishad sequence that we just looked at in the sutta, in this case, for us, it started with ethics leading to non-remorse, or in the other sutta that I mentioned, and the one in the Samyutta Nikaya and the connected discourses, it's dukkha maturing to faith. But in either case, they mature to gladness, and then the gladness comes to piti, piti to pasadi, pasadi to happiness, sukha. So sukha coming to samadhi, concentration. Oh, I've misstated this. The okay, so we were just there. The PT went to tranquility. No, the tranquility went to PT. The PT went to immersion. The immersion went to truly knowing and seeing. I'm sorry, I did this too quickly. Asadi. Concentration. And then knowing and seeing. And then dispassion. Then freedom. And this is what happens when I get a bright idea 10 minutes before the beginning of my class, and I don't carefully review my screen before I think about putting it up. There's one other sutta. There's actually two other suttas that I want to quote to you, which will show different cases about passaddhi, this tranquility, and how it happens, how it manifests itself. So I'm going to go back to a share screen, and I'm going to show you a small segment from the Potthapada Sutta. Potthapada is a very long, deep, profound, meaningful sutta. I couldn't possibly do it justice in one class. We could take a month looking at this particular sutta. This is number 9 in the long discourses. So in this section, this is after the perfection of the sila. Then it says, seeing that the hindrances have been given up, in them, joy springs up. Being joyful, rapture springs up. When the mind is full of rapture, the body becomes tranquil. When the body is tranquil, they feel bliss. In this case, bliss is sukha, that's happiness. And when blissful, the mind becomes immersed. So the happiness is the more steady, calm, positive feeling, which doesn't have the excitement of piti. It's a Vedana, which is the karmic. It's the fruition of of the conditions that brought it about. So happiness is not something that you're using your willpower to make happiness. Instead, this happiness, the sukha, is the natural result of the previous conditions that you put into place. And then when blissful or when happy, the mind becomes immersed, the mind enters into meditation. And then within meditation, secluded from sensual pleasure, secluded from unskillful qualities, they enter and remain in the first absorption, which has rapture and bliss born of seclusion. That's the piti, and sukha, born from being secluded. Secluded from what? Secluded from sensual pleasure and secluded from unskillful qualities, while placing the mind and keeping it connected to its object. Then the sensual perceptions they had previously ceases. At that time, they have a subtle and true perception of the rapture and bliss born of seclusion. And that's how, with training, certain perceptions arise and certain perceptions cease. This is the training. And then it goes on to describe the subsequent suttas as the vitaka vichara, that's the initial thought and sustained thought, or placing the mind and keeping connected. They become still. The mendicant enters in the second absorption, which has rapture and bliss born of immersion. With internal clarity and the mind at one. This is ekodibhava. The mind has become unified. That doesn't mean that the mind has become very narrow-minded and pointed into a single pointed mind, which is just focusing on one point. Instead, it means that you have a singleness of the mind, that all of the parts of mentality are unified into the experience of meditation. And then, but you've given up this placing the mind and keeping it connected. You've given up vitaka vichara, and And then they have the perception of the rapture and bliss born of immersion. Then in the third jhana, the piety is fading away. One enters and remains in the third absorption of the third jhana. And here the equanimity begins to be more of a prominent factor. The mindfulness and awareness becomes more prominent. And then they experience the happiness, the sukha, of which the noble ones say, equanimous and mindful, one meditates in bliss. So this is the happiness of equanimity. Sometimes we think there's happiness is high and pain is low, and equanimity is the thing that's in the middle, that has like neither pleasure nor pain. That's something that's sort of like neutral. But equanimity itself has a kind of a happiness to it. The happiness of being not disturbed. And that equanimity is supporting mindfulness, because that equanimity is not biased. It's able to look on everything in an unbiased way. Then it goes on with the subtle and true perception of the rapture and bliss born of immersion ceases, and they get a new perception, the bliss with equanimity. And then this goes on, giving up pleasure and pain, giving up happiness and sadness. That's somanasa, domanasa. That's like psychological happiness, psychological sadness. Then they enter into the fourth jhana, which is a very neutral state with pure equanimity and mindfulness. And then the subtle and true perception of bliss with equanimity that they had before has ceased, and they have subtle and true perception of the neutral feeling. And that's how certain perceptions arise and certain perceptions cease. I'm giving this small excerpt out of the Potthapada Sutta to try to encourage placing that tranquilization of the body as being a part of the process of entering into deeper meditation. So when you do exercises or learn how to tranquilize the body, or if you're doing the breath meditation and you, within that instruction, you're letting the body become calm and tranquilized, letting the breath become calm and tranquilized, letting the states of mind become calm and tranquilized, that all of these things are not the end of the process, but the mark of the entry to samadhi, as I understand it, the way it's given in that sutta. I'm going to give one more. It's really small and really quick. This is the heartfelt sentiment of the Buddha, the heartfelt explanation. For the dependent, there's agitation. For the independent, there's no agitation. When there's no agitation, there is tranquility. So this is what I'm speaking of, the tranquility, the passaddhi. When there's tranquility, there's no inclination. The inclination is the inclination towards either towards another existence or towards annihilation. So the bhavatanha and the vibhavatanha, those craving for existence or craving for non-existence, is wiped. So with this state of tranquility, there's no inclination. When there's no inclination, there's no coming and going. That's referring to the process of rebirth. When there's no coming and going, there's no passing away and reappearing, passing away from this world, reappearing to another world. When there's no passing away and reappearing, there's no this world or the world beyond or between the two. Just this is the end of suffering. And so I point this sutta to say that the passaddhi, our tranquility, can be a mark that we can experience throughout our entire path of practice. From when we were that drug-addicted murderer and we gave up killing and drugs, we can experience some tranquility from that. And when we are realizing the fruition of becoming a fully awakened arhat, we can experience tranquility there. So there's different measures of tranquility, but tranquility is a hallmark, a characteristic of this path of practice from rather early on all the way up to the very end. I shall stop here and remind you that joy and happiness are also hallmarks, especially of the beginning and middle of the practice, and that later on, the joy and happiness becomes more and more subtle and maybe less and less significant, but that this tranquility continues to be a very significant hallmark of our practice all the way through. So with that, I invite comments and questions. I was trying to show you 4 different contexts in which passaddhi arises. One is in the 7 factors of awakening. One is in this Upanisa sequence. One is in meditation. And then the 4th one is enlightenment. Damon.
I remain confused about whether ethical conduct, which is kind of just mentioned in passing in both of these suttas, is mentioned so, sort of just glancing at it, because ethical conduct in Buddhism is really just a means to the end, which is which is awakening. Whereas it seems again to me that it really should, it just, common sense dictates it should be the other way around. All the experiences of these higher mental states and jhanas really are actually just means towards the end of practicing skillful ethics, without which you cannot end suffering.
Thank you. That's a great question. Luckily, well, I didn't take philosophy in college, and I'm not a philosopher, but I understand that ethics is a branch of philosophy, and it's a very deep question to understand what ethics really is. And one aspect of, or one way that people look at ethics is in terms of the greatest good for the greatest number of people, or something like that, like a welfare ethics. So then if the world could become ethical, then we wouldn't be hurting each other anymore. We wouldn't be harming each other. The wealth of the society would be fairly distributed so that people wouldn't be suffering with starvation and hunger. There would be we would be finding ways to make peace and not to make war, so that people wouldn't suffer the trauma and injury of war. And so, and the justice system would be serving to protect victims from crimes, and while at the same time rehabilitating the criminals, so the criminals could have a more or less of a happier existence. But that approach to ethics has got a lot of problems. There are a lot of puzzles, like what's might be helping one person at the expense of somebody else. And then, there's a completely sort of a different approach to ethics, and that is what I understand is called character ethics. So if you practice developing a mature, balanced, skillful ethics, and that causes you to be a good person, and a good person is a happy person, and that happy, good person is also able to do good in the world without inadvertently doing harm while they're trying to do good. So in Buddhism, the bodhisattva ideal is definitely directed towards doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Or the greatest good that we could do for a being would be to show them the Dhamma in the way that they could come to understand it, so that they could give up their afflictions, and then through wisdom give up craving and clinging. And so that is the greatest good, and it is what the Buddha did. He taught for 50 years for the sake of, for the benefit of gods and humans, to enunciate, explain, and point out this Dhamma. And the Buddha pointed to the monks in a very strong way and said, monks, for the welfare and benefit of beings, for the benefit of humans, the benefit of gods and humans, and for all beings, you should continue to understand the Dhamma accurately, and in the way that's effective, and without misrepresenting the Dhamma. You should enunciate, explain, point it out, and realize it for yourself, and demonstrate it. But in the end, ethics by itself is only a starting point, more like a foundation. And
Okay.
ethics leads to opening the space. It's like open the window or something, or being able to come into a space where there's a chance for wisdom. And then the other level of happiness and welfare is coming from wisdom, which was necessitated by having that starting point of sila. I see Aranya Bodhi has got a hand up.
Hi. Yeah, I have a question about pamoja, primarily pamoja, piti, and just in general, the uplifting qualities of the bojjhangas as opposed to the tranquilizing qualities of the bojjhangas and sati. I notice often, or maybe sometimes I should say, in my meditation that my mind does not incline toward joyful states. It is much happier, or not, I guess happier, but more, it inclines instead toward the more restful states. It feels very restful to be neutral. And I know how to cultivate piti in my meditation, but once I start the process of cultivating that, I become calm, and then once I realize there's the lack of that, and I start to cultivate it, and my mind just doesn't really. It's too much. It's too. It's not as stable as the tranquilizing factors, and my mind gets distracted, or it just doesn't want to do that. It, like, I know how, but it doesn't want to. It doesn't incline to it. And I'm wondering, I think that some of this is due to trauma experiences and just kind of emotional exhaustion at times. And I'm wondering if that's something that I need to just kind of, I hate to say force through, but, push through and do, make the piti anyway and just keep working at it. Or if it's better that I should let that unfold naturally and be okay with just letting it do whatever it inclines to, especially when it comes to rest and tranquility and calm.
I would say that if a person is able to regularly enter into meditation, pick up the meditation object or procedure that they're following, and stay with that procedure for the meditation period without either, falling asleep or being distracted. In other words, if they're able to consistently enter meditation and stay with it without being pulled away because of hindrances, then just keep on practicing like that without seeking to force oneself into having more bliss or, a particular kind of experience. In other words, it's almost like these experiences are a side effect of the meditation procedure. So what you're exerting your effort toward is learning the Dhamma, looking out to develop the perception of the Dhammas that are pointed out. Like, you can make the effort to look out, see, is this permanent or impermanent? These kind of inquiry can be something that one can do with intention, and one can follow the meditation method that you're trained in with intention. I wouldn't say that it's a bad thing if the mind is inclined towards the more equanimous states, and I don't think it's necessary to force the more excited or otherworldly kind of experiences in meditation. But if you're troubled with aversion, if a person is troubled with aversion or hatred or grudge or something like that, then piti is really great to wipe out hostility. So if a person is troubled with hostility, then they should really try to develop pamoja and piti in order to help them to overcome hostility. Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Ayya. I'm a little bit concerned with the hold on, I have to find it. With the Udana 8.4, because towards the end it says, there's no passing away and reappearing. There's no this world or world beyond or between the two. Yet, Buddha makes it very clear in a number of suttas, like, for example, Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta 41, I'm bad at pronouncing it, Salayaka Sutta, section 10, where he's talking about 3 kinds of mental conduct not in accordance with Dhamma, unrighteous conduct. Here someone covets, etc. But then eventually he goes down to say, no fruit or result of good and bad action, no this world, no other world. So he's saying that this is, not something that he would teach. And I don't want to raise a controversy. I'm sure if you're scholarly in your background of Buddhist teachings, there are some questions about the 5th Nikaya, the Kundaka Nikaya, that not all of it is really Buddhist teaching. Good example is the Jataka tales. Those were just famous, kind of like Grimm's Brothers tales or something, things that were sort of pulled into Buddhism and given sort of a Buddhistic, versions and things like that. And even at I believe it was the last council between Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Thailand, and there may have been some other countries involved, that it almost completely fell apart in a big dispute as to whether or not I think it's the Milinda Panha, right? The story of King Milinda or something, or the suttas of King Milinda should be even included in there, So, these things aren't always cut and dried as one might think, when they're approaching them. And one thing about that translation is that last section seems to be in a poetic form. And a lot of times my experience in looking at translations of a lot of the poetry is it doesn't seem to me like Buddha would talk in poetry. And what I mean by that is poetry usually has multiple meanings. That's one of the kind of beauties, you might say, of poetry. And yet Buddha says he tells everything very clearly and precisely, and I've heard a number of very famous bhikkhu translators saying that it's very difficult to translate Pali poetry accurately, because the Pali seems to be a little different in there. And my speculation is that as Buddhism grew and pulled more and more Brahmins in, well, the Vedas are all written in poetry. So I think there was this poetic influence maybe that came into Buddhism at a certain point. Anyway, these are just speculations, but you can see there's a clear, example I just gave, where Buddha says one thing and the sutta is saying something totally different, It may just be a bad translation, I don't know, but anyways, I just want to make that point. Thank you.
It really, thank you for that question. I'm going to share the screen so that people can see exactly what you're referring to. So in many other places, the Buddha strongly condemned the materialistic viewpoint, which is there's no this world or no other world. There's no mother and no father. Meaning that there's the materialists, or you could say they believed that there was not any rebirth. So there's no other life coming after this life. They denied the cycle of samsara, which is the very essence of what the Buddha described as being the strongest instant of dukkha, is the pain of the cycle of rebirth. Now, in this sutta, he's referring to the one who's gone beyond rebirth because they're a fully enlightened person and there's not going to be any further existence after this one. So this Chutu Papata is dying and coming into existence. Asati doesn't exist. And no, Ida, that's here, and Hurang is the other. So there's not this world or the other world or anything in between. But this is given not in the context of the description of the samsara, but as the description as the end of dukkha, so that the end of dukkha is the end of personal rebirth. So now, if there's some kind of development where the later on texts began to go wander away from the original teachings of that the Buddha was giving in his lifetime, one thing that probably happened is that the Buddha was made more and more glorious and more like omniscient, more and more all-powerful, and having qualities that the Buddha was not really that interested in claiming for himself because they were not relevant to the Dhamma that he had to explain. But in this case, whether it be authentic or not authentic, what they're saying is there certainly is this world or the beyond in the cycle of rebirth and samsara and in the causation related to karma, but that for the one who's gone beyond, who has this nisita, they have given up clinging to anything at all. So any kind of state of existence or any aspect of identity is completely gone. And then they've given up this ground of the whole ground. I don't want to use that expression, of ground of being, because that's referring to a Christian idea. But the psychological dependence on creating any kind of a mental formation and clinging to it. So this is the state where truly there's like not any expectations and no reason to be frustrated because of any expectation that you want to be met. And that's the definition of this tranquility. There's no agitation because of no craving for anything at all. And I'm sure that the no inclination is referring to the inclination towards becoming or towards not becoming. On your other point, Richard, about whether the Buddha used poetry would have double meanings, I am pretty sure that even the early texts do have a fair amount of puns, which would be a double meaning for the purpose of taking some like a simple and erroneous belief that somebody had and showing them how that simple belief could be transformed by looking at it in a different way, and then it could be elevated to become an aspect of the true Dhamma. So I don't necessarily agree that there's not any wordplay throughout the suttas, but it's definitely true what you said, that the belief that there's not any this world or the next world was an aspect of the materialist school, which was condemned by the Buddha. I'll go to Damon.
Yeah, you started to answer my question before, but not completely. So you did mention Bodhisattva ideal. So I want to know, in your tradition, is a Bodhisattva ideal taught? And if it is, should I then aspire to sacrifice by delaying my own enlightenment and instead prioritize the awakening of others? So it's a twofold question. Is it yes or no to the first part?
Well, if you're undertaking the Bodhisattva practice, you are not concerned about becoming enlightened in this lifetime, because you're doing a practice that in some subsequent lifetime might result in you being born as a Sammasambuddha and rescuing the world from darkness at a time in the future when it's coming to darkness.
And so in your tradition, is that the game plan?
No, we actually feel that there was a misunderstanding about the Bodhisattva ideal. We don't, I personally don't know what I'm capable of attaining, because I don't, fully understand all the conditions that I brought with me into this lifetime. So I'm trying to stay with what the Buddha taught. I want, instead of following what the Buddha did, I'm trying to follow what the Buddha told me to do. And
does he mention even once in all his teachings, does he mention the Bodhisattva ideal explicitly?
it only comes up in the context of, before I was a Buddha, when I was a Bodhisattva, these things happened.
Okay.
But it doesn't come up in terms of him advising people to follow the Bodhisattva path.
Thank you for clarifying that. Okay.
Yeah. If you could become enlightened, even if you just became got fully into stream entry or something like that, you could do so much good in the world, even before the final full enlightenment. Or if you could become a fully enlightened arhat within this lifetime before you die, it would have such a dynamic and powerful impact on the world. It would definitely be worth doing. But if you're going to put aside your own enlightenment, thinking I'm just going to try to be very generous and practice the paramis, and sometime in the future lifetime, if you've not obtained some stage of awakening, you don't know whether or not, you don't know what's going to happen in the future. Something could happen that could bring you into a woeful state.
So can I cover all my bases by getting some basic attainment, after a couple of decades, and then start sacrificing on behalf of others?
I would say the best time to practice would be now, and the best place to practice is here.
Okay.
And you should do your best here and now, according to what you're capable of. Whatever you're able to understand, that's good. You should do that quickly without delay.
Thank you.
Okay, I think this may be enough. Let's give respects to the Triple Gem. Samma Sambuddha Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantam Abhivadami. Savakato Bhagavata Dhamma Dhammam Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham. Thank you, everyone, for your patient listening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.